Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. It's a beautiful morning here. I'm not in Philadelphia, as you can tell. I am in the wonderful city of Langley, Washington. Um, you know, travel around a bit to get folks content that they need, also to visit friends and family. So that's what we're doing today. We've got a good show for you today. If I can help Rick in the background get on to the broadcast, he's having a little trouble. But we've got Rick Lewis, producer of the ongoing Plight of the Ferryman. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the Pastry War, probably a war you've never heard of. France versus Mexico, 1838. We're going to be talking about that traveling. We're going to talk about bankers being crazy, and we're going to talk a little bit about Afghan refugees. So stay tuned, and feel free to comment on the broadcast as we go. Um, I'm your host, James Jackson, he, they pronouns, executive producer of Light Beef Productions. We are a production company in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has had a little bit of a aftershock from the hurricane that hit and made a mess out of New Orleans. But hopefully they'll get some good recovery help with the help of the Biden administration and the current FEMA administration and whatnot. Um, we just saw some flooding, um, and it is what it is. You know, these weather events are going to happen more regularly as as the human caused climate change increases. So as human caused climate change has more and more effect over the climate, these one-off weather events that should happen every, decade or so are going to happen more and more frequently. So anybody running for office or looking to figure out what the next big thing is, it is and has been climate change. I highly encourage you to apply your entrepreneurial skills, your political skills towards resolving that. Sorry, my camera is a little bit off. I'm not in my normal location, like I said. Um, so everything's a little weird today. Um, so the pastry war. I'm relatively certain you haven't heard of it. If you have heard of it, it's a funny story. In 1828, there was a military coup in Mexico. The military, folks like Santa Anna and other military leaders from the end of the war uh, with the U.S. Um, decided that they should be in power. They'd done all this work um, to secure the country, but they didn't really get much out of it. Um, and during the military coup, uh, it was a populist war. The population rallied around um, the military leaders, and a bunch of citizens destroyed buildings and businesses owned by foreign nationals. One of those people whose businesses was destroyed was a French pastry chef. In Mexico City, there's always been an international contingent. and this French pastry chef had his building destroyed. Well, much like today, the government is responsible for keeping your buildings and businesses and self protected. And so he applied to the French government for a fee. Basically his reconstruction costs. He just sent an invoice to the French government because that's his government. So, the governments are supposed to figure it out amongst themselves how they're going to take care of this. So the French government sat on the invoice for 10 years. Um, and then one day, the treasurer of King Louis Philippe brought this old invoice to the king's attention, and he said, "Hey, there's this guy in Mexico City who didn't get who got his building destroyed, um, and he wants to get the funds back from what it cost him to rebuild his building. How do we do that?" And so King Louis Philippe billed the Mexican government for 600,000 pesos. Um, I mean, in today's money, that's a huge sum in US dollars, probably on the order of 2 or 3 billion. Um, so he was charged 600,000 pesos. And the Mexican government was like, no way, not our responsibility. We're not gonna do anything. We're just gonna ignore this. And normally that's where the story would end. The two governments at deadlocks and nobody doing anything. But this is a story of vast overreaction. The vast overreaction in this case was that King Louis Philippe declared war against Mexico. So in 1839, in March, or 1838, excuse me, October of 1838, a French fleet arrived in Mexico, blockaded the city of Veracruz, and tried to force the payment. Instead of paying, the Mexican government decided to go to war. And several battles followed throughout November and December, and about 250 soldiers had been killed by the end of December. Um, and Santa Anna was brought back out of retirement. He led the Mexican army, lost a leg, wounded by grape shot. And finally, in March of 1839, the British stepped in to broker a peace deal between the Mexican government and the French. Um, as part of the peace deal, uh, the Mexican government did pay the 600,000 pesos, but in this whole story, they've lost lives, they've lost capital, they've lost a lot. Um, uh, one second, just helping Rick. Um, So, yeah, they lost a lot, and all of it could have been avoided through several not wise decisions that were made. A vast overreaction by the Mexican government in regards to paying back a debt. A vast overreaction by the French government in regards to um, demanding this debt be paid back. And the reason I bring up this story of overreaction is that we're seeing a lot of it uh, even today. Um, in the most simple of things, from individuals to governments um, uh, uh, to everything. We're seeing vast overreactions um, that are causing people to lose out on opportunities, lose out on money, lose out on time, that um, that that they could take advantage of if they weren't vastly overreacting. So, how do we avoid these vast overreactions? Sorry about this, folks. Just always having technical problems at the worst possible time. So just having trouble getting our today's special guest on. And one of those vast overreactions that I wanted to highlight is modern banking. Um, the story of modern banking is quite interesting right now. Um, in the world of modern banking, um, you have the Fed in the US, you have the Fed, you have credit scores, you have banks, and that's about it. Then you have consumers. Um, so those interactions of in that system are what creates our banking picture. And if you are all at all an investor, if you have a 401k retirement account, anything that depends on the monetary markets for part of what money you have available to you either now or later in retirement, then you've seen um, how these overreactions can affect your daily life. We have um, bankers trying to get out of lending, bankers trying to get into lending. We have the Fed holding down lending rates so that lending is encouraged. And all of this is creating a chaotic picture that investors, who are traditionally some of the most chaotic parts of the market, have to respond to or feel they have to respond to. And it creates this oscillating vast overreaction picture where you have suddenly, the market up huge amounts and the market down huge amounts, and nobody knows what's going on. Everybody's going crazy. So, what do we do to avoid this vast overreaction? Well, one thing we could do is just rely on the fact that everybody wants to be alive and happy and do the best by themselves and their family that can at all times. Um, but we tend to, in this marketplace, look at look to people who are quote unquote in leadership and try and figure out, excuse me, what they want to do. And that seems to be the wrong way to go about it right now. So, how does this relate with Afghan refugees? Well, one of the vast overreactions happening right now is the vast overreaction of um, people to immigration policy changes, to immigration in general, to uh, regime change, to everything. Um, there's a vast overreaction um, to the idea of immigration in general amongst some of the population. They don't bother to look at history, to um, look at the theme of immigration as a holistic picture, and see that every nation on the face of the planet, whenever it's receiving immigrants, doesn't actually cause that economy harm. It increases the economy. It creates more opportunity. It enlivens economies that were having a hard time. Um, that's the true story of immigration. And if you live in the US, you're either the descendant of an immigrant or the descendant of a slave or the descendant of a native person. And that's really the whole story. There's no other way that you got here. Um, you might be the descendant of more than one category. I'm the descendant of slavery, African slavery in the United States. And I am the descendant of first generation descendant of an immigrant and second generation descendant of an immigrant. Um, Immigration created my family here. It wasn't possible for my family to be here without immigration, and without relations with the native peoples of the United States. Part of my family in history is of native descent too. So, the world in which we live is only helped by immigration and immigrants. So I, for one, look forward to the folks that are trying to leave Afghanistan, coming to the United States and contributing to our culture and our society and our economy. Um, what else do we have today? Traveling. Vast overreactions in traveling. Um, you know, it's interesting. A lot of theories have gone around now that the Pfizer vaccine is fully approved by the FDA, whether vaccinations will be required for certain things. One of those things that was proposed was requiring vaccinations for air travel. And I find that interesting because you do already have to have vaccinations required mandatorily for air travel or any kind of travel to certain destinations. If you go to certain countries where things like smallpox have not been eradicated, smallpox is a bad example. I believe the WHO said smallpox had been eradicated in the human population as of I'll look it up. The 20 somethings. At any rate, in 1980. That was quite a while ago. Um, some folks that watch this channel weren't born yet. So smallpox was eradicated in the human population in 1980, thanks to vaccines. Vaccines work, folks. Get vaccinated. Um, but the vast overreaction here is to the idea of taking a vaccine. Um, what I don't. Perhaps I'm naive in thinking that folks would do what is best for them and their family and their loved ones and their society. Um, but I would hope that in general, folks would be willing to do that. And I don't understand exactly what the objection is to people taking a vaccine that has been given to millions of people billions of people without um, even a hint of uh, negative reaction for even a small portion of the population. So, uh, I'm regularly befuddled by people's people's way of going about things, but this one's really befuddling to me. It's a simple thing that you can do to help your neighbors, help your friends, help your family. Um, why not do it? Helps yourself too. Little frog in my throat this morning. Not probably not the best to be talking about health with a frog in my throat, but whatever, it happens. Um, so why this vast overreaction? Why and how did it get linked to um, nationalism? Um, how did it get linked to fundamentalism? To um, uh, yeah, the how did those things come about? I think a lot of people have been exploring this idea, and some of the exploration is pretty accurate. Um, I've seen some theories that, this came about uh, because, of stupidity, because the population who subscribes to this isn't that bright. Um, I don't know. I'd like to give the benefit of the doubt to folks and um, give them the ability, give the thought that people really are trying to look after themselves, even if they do things that are counter to their own good. Um, so, what would create this situation in which somebody is doing the opposite of good for themselves and for their family? Um, and it's this propaganda that we've lived with our entire lives. Um, in the 80s, if you're a child of the 80s, you probably know this, but if you're not, you're living with the result of the 80s. In the 80s, there was a huge nationalistic wave. Um, the United States had suffered some um, public relations defeats. Simple things, the space race was going well, but there was the Challenger disaster. Um, the arms race was at a deadlock, but we were at a deadlock with an economy that we said shouldn't work. Um, there were no wins in terms of warfare for us to turn to, for politicians to turn to and say, "Hey, look, here's the United States. Here's what we do best." And so there was a need for folks to have a have something to look to. That this resulted in Ronald Reagan, to be perfectly frank. But then Ronald Reagan was on the scene, and we had him, and that's for good or for bad. That's where we got what we got with that. I have Rick here finally. Looks like. Rick, go ahead and unmute yourself. Let me make sure I have your audio. And Good morning. I can hear you. Let's see if the people on the internets can hear you. Let me fix this up real quick. This layout isn't so great because I am in a remote location. Um, One sec. Okay. Okay. And let's fix that. Okay. Let's unlock that. All right. So this will have to do for now. But this layout isn't exactly right. I'll be futzing with it. But okay, so welcome to the screen.
Sorry it took so long. Hi, my name is Rick Lewis. My pronouns are I am, he, him. Um, I am, for the purposes of this conversation, I'm the writer, composer, producer, and director of Top Off, the ongoing plight of the Ferryman. I pretty much do any and all things theatrical, kind of what I do in general, and there we are. Um, the storyline itself is it's funny, it's interesting. It's a lot about self discovery, self empowerment, and being authentic to oneself. It's a very funny show, and everybody dies. It's grown. I actually wrote it in 2015, and I wound up writing it because MTI at the last minute screwed me out of rights on a certain show, and I had a cast, and I had a production schedule, and I had a rehearsal schedule, but then suddenly found myself without a show, so I wrote one. I've always been interested in the concept of the ferryman, ferrying souls from one side to another, and always thought about whether or not the ferryman actually got sick of their job. So I wrote a show about the ferryman getting sick of what they were doing and wanting to figure out a way to find something more interesting. What was kind of interesting about the way the show wound up being written is that most of the characters wind up being very open ended as far as casting, as far as uh, racial identity, sexual identity, orientation, that sort of thing. Um, I've always found that a lot of times very specific shows get written and very specific stories get told. And I've always been of the mindset of instead of complaining about somebody not telling the stories that I think should be told, I, as a writer, should just write those sorts of things. So as the show has developed over the past few years, um, it's gotten the cast has gotten more diverse in every facet just because the characters are open ended. So whenever I've cast it for a workshop or for production, or in this case, this is the first like super real version of it that we've done. And so we've been able to just kind of open the doors wide as far as who's involved and who's on stage and who's represented and who's seen. And so that's one of the things about the show that I think I'm most excited about. They can see it at the Plays and Players Theater, which is 1714 Delancey Street. It's like right in Rittenhouse Square. Um, we are running every weekend in October. We open October 1st, 1 month from today. And so we have one show on Friday night, a Saturday afternoon, Saturday night show, and a Sunday afternoon show. Um, October 1st, our after party, our opening night after party, is going to be upstairs at Quigs in Plays and Players. And that's going to be a drag and burlesque show featuring some of the most notable and prominent drag and burlesque performers in Philly. So the whole thing is just all kinds of fun and all sorts of cool. Tickets actually been on sale for since August 1st. You can go to our website. Our website is stageworks.com. That's STAGEWORKX.com. And on the front, right on the front page, you can access the site. You can look at the show. You can look at things about the show. You can buy tickets there. There are certain companies that we're doing partnerships with. So if you look on our website, you can see those particular companies. If you go there and you bring a receipt to our show or a coupon code, you get a discount. And then if you take a receipt from our show to those businesses, you can also get a discount. So we're doing lots of partnerships to make things easier for people in general. Couple things. Even though there's lots and lots of death, it's actually a family-friendly show. So bring the kids. Uh, um, October 9th, we're having a Pride Night. So between the two shows, we're actually having an LGBTQ panel about uh, whether or not diversity and inclusion in the arts is whether or not it means what we think it should mean, and how that actually works itself out practically. So there's a panel there starring some people like CJ Higgins is one of our panelists. Some folks from some actual social organizations in the LGBTQ community are there. I don't want to mess up any of their names, but go to our website because you can see those organizations there. On the 16th, we're having a costume contest. On the 23rd, I think we're having like a goth night. So there's all different sorts of things that are going on with this show. Uh, so far, our COVID protocols, we're doing temperature checks and requiring masks of all patrons. I'm not at the point yet where I'm demanding vax cards, but depending on what the climate is like in the city, as we get closer, that might be something that we institute. Once again, check our Facebook page or check our website. As we get closer to opening night, we will be listing and updating our COVID protocols weekly. I think that's it.
Awesome. So I'm getting a little feedback from when I'm talking to you, but that's okay. It sounds like an exciting show. I love all the graphic nature of all of the promotion work that you've been doing. It sounds fascinating and like something that's right in keeping with the time of examining all of these concepts and thoughts. I don't know if you've watched the show before. Generally, I usually have my artist guest at the top of the show and then kind of work my way back into the subject matter. But we've
Sorry,
been
I screwed that
talking.
up today.
Oh, that's all right. It's no worries. I just was doing that by way of introducing the topics for today. Um, we've been talking about vast overreactions. Have you ever heard of the pastry war?
No.
Okay. So this was France versus Mexico. France in 1838. France blockaded Veracruz, Mexico, over the matter of 600,000 pesos that the French government was charging the Mexican government for the destruction of a French pastry chef's shop during a insurrection the year 10 years previous. So the French pastry chef lost his shop during an insurrection. Billed the French government. The French government came across the invoice 10 years later, billed the Mexican government more than the French pastry chef was asking for, but basically by way of excuse to go to war, I guess. 600,000
Colonizers
pesos.
going to colonize.
600,000 pesos was a lot of money back then. Um, so, but it seemed like a vast overreaction to me also to go to war over 600,000 pesos, which then, after a year of war and a 2 year negotiation period with the English playing referee, they finally, the Mexican government had to pay the 600,000 pesos anyway. Um, so, they lost 250 men plus, whatever business was blockaded. And anyway, this is all just by way of, saying that these vast overreactions seem to lead to bad results all the time anyway. And I was wondering if there are any instances of vast overreaction that drive your plot, because I know that vast overreaction can be a plot device in works of fiction as well as being a plot device in real life.
I'm gonna work backwards. Like you talk about real life. It's as you're mentioning that whole situation. Like my first thought is, isn't there this like 20-year war that we're getting out of that was a vast overreaction that we shouldn't have blown up a country over? That's the first thing that I'm thinking about while you're talking about that. Is
Oh
actually
yeah, no, yeah, that
right.
I was just getting to that when you came on, how, the 1980s was this time where in the US we set up all of these very nationalistic things, that was a vast overreaction to, not doing very well in the Cold War versus the USSR. But yeah,
Uh,
so these vast overreactions echo throughout history.
we're good at them. We're very, very good at them. Like I said, colonizers will colonize. But as sort of a plot device, it's interesting because usually one of the things I think that happens in sort of any plot device is there's a point in time where your lead character is going to make a decision, and they're going to make a decision as to what road they're going to go down to or how they're going to resolve whatever is presented as the plot device. And typically, what happens that makes the better stories is when your character, at least initially, makes a poor choice or an overreactive choice, or instead of dealing with things simply and rationally, they deal with things passionately, let's say. So, and again, without giving much away, because people say I give a lot away when I say everybody dies. It's set in the underworld, so it really doesn't. But like in this case, in the case of this show, without giving too much away, seeing how the lead character winds up dealing with those that come across his path, um, it could be said that some of the things could be handled a bit more dexterly. But then I think we as people often, yeah, I think how overreactive we are totally has to deal with what we think we can get away with. I think that happens individually. I think it happens, artistically. I think it happens nationalistically. Um, how we react really comes down to how much we think our reactions will cost.
Interesting. So you think that there's an economic calculation, not necessarily economic in the forms of dollars and cents,
Right,
but
right,
an
right.
economic calculation in that everybody does in their own head, as they're deciding whether or not to act a certain way.
Um, why don't retail cashiers flip customers off? You know, why don't
Good
people
point.
tell rude people what they really think? Um, by on the flip side of that, looking at sort of the political climate that we're in now, um, why will guys, load up all their guns in a pickup truck and then go on a big parade? Or why will people mock, other people's differences or diversity or those things. I think a lot of times there is that let me move the abacus and decide what works and what I can get away with and what I can't. That sort of economic, as you said, counting of the cost.
Is there a world in which, because I mean, so perhaps I should ask it this way: why does it seem that the economic cost, that economic calculation changes over time, so where that certain groups feel more empowered to spend that political capital in that sort of way rather than other groups, and it seems to swing back and forth to an extent. We always talk about the not we, but people in general always talk about the swing of politics, that it goes back and forth between liberal and progressive and conservative. Um, I I I perhaps can't fathom the the um, the what creates the economy of political capital that allows people to uh, express these ideas that are antithetical to their social nature. Like humans are a social creature. We live in a society, literally. Our the whole point of organizing into cities and states and countries is to create a social network. Um, the most popular thing to do on the internet is social interaction. Um, how how why suddenly is it uh, economically viable to express antisocial thought uh, so publicly?
I I think there are two things that drive that, and while they look the same, I think they come from different places. I think one is the fear of a loss of power. Um, power and power is weird because power is actual and power is also percept or perception. So I think there's a fear of loss of power, but on the other end of that spectrum, I think there is it can come from a place of feeling powerless and not actually having power. So on one hand, you have nationalists and people who are used to, you know, mom and apple pie and baseball, and this is what America is, and this is what America is supposed to be. And the concept of that apple cart being upset, the concept of what you think America is and is supposed to be being altered, being changed, being rewritten, for lack of a better word. When you have that sort of thing, that creates a fear of a lack of status quo, a fear of a lack of control, a fear of the lack of um, the birthright of relevance. So once that starts getting messed with, then, well, it doesn't matter about these other people that are in society, because these other people that are in society, in my mind, they have always belonged in a place. You know, we have a societal pecking order. And now that these people are trying to come out of that pecking order, I'm now not so much concerned about what society might become. I want what I think society should be. I think the flip side of that is the other part of that group who are realizing, okay, we have been disenfranchised for so long. We have been powerless for so long. We are now in a position where we can exercise some of that power. And so now that we can do that, we are less interested in maintaining the societal order that we've had. and doing things the way it's always been done. I'm totally going to like co-opt this and bring the show in here.
That's fine.
One of the things that we very intentionally did while we were building the show um, is to make sure that our department heads um, were representative of the community at large. A lot of times, companies will do what I call ambiguous diversity. So they'll have a picture of 35 people and there'll be the little dots and spots in it. But when you actually look at who's doing what, um, the people who are leading are still the same gatekeepers. The people who are at the top of the food chain are the usual ones. And I wanted to make a very specific point just to say our A1, our audio engineer, is a Black woman, which I've never seen in Philadelphia theater ever. And that's like just one example. But so as there's all of this upheaval going on in Philadelphia theater and things going on with the Walnut, and as we're coming out of the pandemic and there's this talk that's happened about diversity and inclusion, but as we're getting down to brass tacks, it's not really happening. And people are wanting to let the same folks in that were kind of first in line before. We wanted to be able to say, look, you can do a show that's diverse, that's inclusive. Here's how. And there's even within the community as we come back, there's backlash because there's people who want to keep things the way it was, want to maintain that same structure that's been in place or get back to normal, which to look at the question that you were asking about society, like our community, our theatrical community is either going to change and elevate and become more diverse, or it's going to go back to the status quo that was happening. But those two camps are still, now that we're getting down into actual making of theater, those two camps are not communal. Like we're not the theater community that we could or should be yet.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with, I mean, I talk with my mother all the time. I had an interesting conversation with my mother about this kind of, I don't know if I would present it as a problem so much as situation. There's, you even in the general body politic, you have two camps, so to speak. And this ties back to gun violence, and here's how. So we were talking about gun violence in Philadelphia and the idea of defunding the police. Why defunding the police would be the right thing to do to end gun violence. How, like, and my mom is, obviously older than me, and she's a little bit of the generation that trusts police, that believes in policing. So she's like, I don't understand, like, I get that police are doing too much and that they're overfunded, but the defund the police seems like such a bad phraseology. And I said, but it is the correct phraseology.
Mm-hmm.
It is exactly what people who say defund the police mean. They mean defund the police. It is exactly what needs to happen. And so you then get to, well, why does that need to happen? And why that needs to happen is because you have this two camp system. If you look at a city like Philadelphia, you have neighborhoods, whole sections of society that have been disenfranchised. They've been lied to. They've learned generationally not to trust the system, the government as it's set up. They've learned through vast experience that interacting with the system leads to negative results. Mm-hmm. So another system exists. Like, you're not going to have people living next to each other and not have a way of taking care of problems that crop up, because no two people can interact and always be on the best footing. You're going to
Right.
have an argument every once in a while. So in a neighborhood that's been completely disenfranchised, where you don't trust the police, you don't trust the courts, you don't, if you think that the instant I walk into court, I'm going to get arrested and either deported or put in jail, um, you're not going to go to
You're
court
not going to
to
court. Right. Right.
right. Somebody steals your car, you're not going to court. You're gonna go and solve the
I'm
problem through your
right.
community.
Correct.
And so there's these two tracks that run side by side, um, that create the system that we have, and what defunding the police would lead to is a disinvestment in the police doing so many things. Once they're not doing so many things, then new systems have to take the place of those things that they're not doing any longer. And there's money to set up those systems. Once
Right.
those systems are set up, it gives people an opportunity to believe in the system again, or believe in this new, these new systems that are in the place of the police. Because right now, I have any problem from somebody's tearing down a building illegally to somebody, slipped and fell on my sidewalk. All of those problems, I have to call the police. There's no other solution to it.
Right.
And you try and get around it. Like, and I've seen this, on social media, people trying to get around you know, this guy is obviously having a bad day. How do we get around calling the police? How do we, this homeless man is just like flipping out. He's obviously having a mental break. How do we get him the services that he needs without calling the police? And the response from the system is call the police.
I think there's also a different mindset in different places. I talk to people about this all the time. Um, Out in the suburbs, and full disclosure, like I live in a suburb in New Jersey. I live in the woods, I tell people. So out in the suburbs, police protect and serve. In the city, police patrol and occupy. To think that out here, we don't have people who have mental episodes is ridiculous. To think that out here, we don't have people who walk down the street completely tweaked out is ridiculous. To think that out here, we don't have situations of domestic violence is ridiculous. The difference is that the mindset of law enforcement is completely different in those two arenas. When you talk about things like gun violence, like the thing that most, because I've had conversations with people, and I did this because at one point I was trying to come up with and codify a philosophy on controlling and mitigating gun violence. I have people that I've talked to who live in Kentucky who have been around guns all their lives, and they have 30 guns in their houses, and gun violence where they live isn't an issue. It's not a problem. So what I found in talking to folks is that when you have a situation where resources in general are lacking, like when you think about like the urban area, and you think about people needing to battle for resources, people needing to battle um, just for everyday life, what winds up happening is dealing with things outside of the system, like you were mentioning, becomes the default. Like out here in the suburbs, people don't have to deal with people having mental episodes the same way because there are resources in place to deal with them. People don't have to deal with poverty the same way because poverty doesn't exist in the same kind of way. Like I talk to people all the time, like there's poor, and then there's South Jersey poor. But like South Jersey poor isn't really poor. We just think it is a lot of times. But like South Jersey poor doesn't compare to Strawberry Mansion poor. Like don't even think it does. And so once defunding, when defunding happens, but not just defunding, but also changing the mindset of what policing is supposed to be and changing the mindset of what it means to put things in place within communities. Like that's the kind of mind shift that needs to happen in order to deal with things like gun violence, in order to deal with things like perceptions of difference and reality and the them versus us. And a lot of it really is just going to come down to it's almost like reversing all of the money that went out of the urban area. Like when you think like what was South Philly like 40 years ago and what's it like now and why is it different? And a lot of the reasons that it's different is the money, the structure, and the resources moved out to Paoli, moved out to like Trevos, moved out to Langhorne. And so it's not that the people are necessarily better people or worse people or whatever, but the resources and the infrastructure was systematically removed. And so then you have this vacuum. And in this vacuum comes things like police that patrol rather than to protect, people that have to compete for resources rather than share resources, blah, 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 blah. Which brings us all back to that, like, what makes it okay for us to be less societal than we are intrinsically and naturally.
Right. Well, it's 11 o'clock East Coast time. It's 8 o'clock West Coast time. I've been on for an hour. I want to respect everybody's time that tuned in. We posted Rick's Stageworks link in all the chats on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. So go visit and purchase tickets for the Plight of the Ferryman coming in October in Center City, Philadelphia at
Plays and
the theater
players.
at Plays and Players. Sorry, and thank you, Rick, for joining me this morning. I'm sorry it took so long to get you together on
Sorry about
on the
that.
screen. No, it's not. No,
Hey,
no worries. We should have a better way of doing it. But
let's do this again sometime.
all right, we will. And you're always welcome to jump on any of the shows anytime you see it live and you think, hey, this would be a cool topic to talk about. So feel free to jump on. And now that you have at least once, then you should have an easier time next time.
Yeah.
So yeah, go see the ongoing Plight of the Ferryman, Stageworks Productions, and tune in. I believe we have a show next week. I want to thank Rick and say bye to Rick. I'm going to transition to just a one-up of me. So thank you again so much, Rick, for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again soon. Tune in again next week for another coffee break chat. We'll have new guests, new topics. As you heard, if you listen through most of this hour, we talk about current events. We talk about arts. We talk about politics. And we kind of interrelate them all, and as we talk with our guests and our friends. So if you have enjoyed the show, please hit the like button on Facebook. Hit the care or love or whatever button and share the post. Let people watch it in replay. It'll be running in replay about 5 minutes after this broadcast ends. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. We have all of those channels. and they will all notify you when we go live. You can see our content on those channels, and you can get other content that we produce regularly. We regularly draw attention to ongoing topics on our Facebook. We regularly post news and information and breaking news on our Twitter. And we publish exciting new things on YouTube all the time. So please tune in again next week. Consider subscribing to our Patreon channel, patreon.com/LateThiefProductions. We have subscriptions for as little as $1 a month. And most of the subscriptions get you access to information and behind the scenes posts that we don't post to the general public, and it also gets you sneak peeks of posts that we're going to post to this general public before the general public sees them. So thanks once again, everyone. Tune in next week and enjoy your week.